Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to welcome you here today. My name is Jeff Crawley, and I'm the Director of the Center for HIV and Infectious Disease Policy here at the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law. This is also a class for the O'Neill Colloquium, and I co-teach with Professor Larry Johnson, who's actually out of the country today. But we're excited to have all of you. The way this will work is our keynote address, then we'll take a very quick break, like 5 minutes, and then we'll have our panel discussion. Because it's a class, we typically start out giving our students a few questions, but it'll be open to all of you. But now it's really my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Charles Holmes. He's the director of the Center for Innovation and Global Health, a sister center at the O'Neill Institute. He's served in, he's also a professor of medicine at Georgetown University. He's served in leadership positions across government, academia, non-governmental organizations, including chief medical officer and deputy U.S. Global Coordinator for PEPFAR, and as the CEO of the Center for Infectious Disease Research in Zambia, where he advanced national health priorities and strengthened research and public health training in India. His current work focuses on innovative system approaches to strengthening national health programs in partnership with government, funders, and civil society. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Charles.
Welcome, everyone. It's great to be with you. It's just such a privilege to be here today to introduce this session and to introduce someone whose work is so important to the next very transformative phase of the HIV response. And just to say, over the years, I've been really privileged to have a frontline view on some of these transformative moments. The early days of introducing an antiretroviral treatment globally, the move towards better drugs, less toxic, more well-tolerated drugs, to the expansion of more effective prevention, DMMC, and other interventions. But now, thanks to remarkable science and innovation, we stand at yet another really important pivot point for the academic response. New medicine, you'll hear a lot about, long-acting injectables, that can be given twice a year, has been developed in such a thoughtful way that it will dramatically expand access and ease of use, reaching people regardless of who they are and whatever their circumstances. And having just returned from Malawi yesterday, I can say, engaging with their government as well as a couple of other regional governments, there's tremendous excitement about this innovation, and plans are already underway to bring this promise to reality. So with that, it really truly is a special honor to introduce Dr. Mupali Das, someone I view as a courageous and visionary leader who has been at the forefront of developing and advancing this innovation over years. Dr. Das is Vice President for Clinical Development in HIV Prevention and Virology Pediatrics at Gilead Sciences and head of HIV Prevention. She's an infectious disease physician and public health researcher, has led the Lenacapavir Purpose program from concept to the pivotal phase 3 trials that have been so important as of late, helping to demonstrate an unprecedented, nearly perfect efficacy for HIV prevention and shaping global regulatory milestones. Her team's work contributed to the landmark FDA approval in the US earlier this year, as well as the subsequent international endorsement of WHO, as well as others. Mopali, as many of you know in this room, is a stalwart champion for accelerating access to innovative products and has a history of spearheading things like the addition of the adolescent indication for Truvada, as well as for Truvada PrEP, as well as evaluating remdesivir for compassionate use in pregnant children. Early in her career, Dr. Das helped pioneer something I remember vividly just coming out of fellowship, the community viral load network that influenced the development of the U.S. HIV/AIDS strategy and evidence that with the right set of circumstances, policy can indeed be steered by rigorous, equity-focused science. So today, she continues to advance prevention science and implementation with urgency, with empathy, and I would like to welcome Dr. Mupali Das. Thanks.
Well, I'm sorry about that. I'm well, here. It's my honor to speak methodology today, and I will just jump in since that took an unnecessarily long time. Okay, so when I was in college and medical school and residency, I had the opportunity to work with Paul Farmer, who was one of my mentors. And this is a picture that might be familiar to some of you. It's in the book Mountains Beyond Mountains, written about Dr. Farmer. And it's a picture I took when I was working with him during medical school. And while I was working for him, my job was to make sure his references were good. And this was in the days before AI or computers, so it was actually a little bit harder because I'm old. Anyway, but my favorite quote from the book that I was helping him on, which was called Infections and Inequality, is that infections track along the fault lines of social inequality. And what I have gathered over the past several years of my career and my work at Gilead is that innovation without intention can unwittingly exacerbate those disparities. So if we want to focus on making a difference with infectious diseases, we have to be truly intentional. We've had a commitment to developing HIV treatment and prevention medications for a very, very long time. Probably some of you guys weren't even born. So the company has been around since 1987, and we've worked on a variety of HIV medicines as well as viral hepatitis and remdesivir for COVID, which I also helped on, and working on drugs for new pandemics. But we won't be talking about that today. Despite the progress that we've made in the HIV response with the existing treatments and medications, there's still a significant unmet need for more choices and more options for HIV prevention. And when I say PrEP, that's pre-exposure prophylaxis. And what that means is you take a medicine before you're exposed to something infectious, like if you were to travel somewhere where there's malaria, you would get malaria PrEP, and you would take pre-exposure prophylaxis before you went abroad, and for a bit when you got back to make sure that you wouldn't get malaria. There's another kind of prophylaxis that we talk about, which is PEP, which is post-exposure prophylaxis. That means after you've been exposed to a disease, you can take a medicine to prevent you from getting it. So that example would be like meningitis. If you're exposed to meningitis, sometimes that happens on college campuses, you can take a medicine to prevent yourself from getting meningitis. In HIV, we have a combination of pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is for negative people who know they're HIV negative to take, and there are currently four medications approved for that. So the first two are daily pills. The second one is an injectable that's intramuscular, that's every 2 months. And then the third one, and the fourth one is the medicine that we're going to talk about today, which is you also have post-exposure prophylaxis. So in the unfortunate event where a healthcare worker gets a needle stick, or someone has condom break, or something, you can go to your student health service and get post-exposure prophylaxis to make sure that you don't get HIV after an exposure. We'll talk about that later. Not the focus of today's talk, but I wanted to make sure that we all understood the definitions of the things that we're talking about. Now, we still have about 1.3 million cases of HIV globally, and not enough people are on pre-exposure prophylaxis who should be. And there's an estimate from the CDC and other CDC colleagues that approximately 1.2 million people in the United States should be taking a medicine for HIV prevention, but only 36% of them are. And there are significant disparities in who is taking HIV prevention. So of the people taking it, it's 94% people who are white and only 13% of folks who are Black, or 24% who are Hispanic or Latinx. And that can explain some of the disparities, because people of color and people from certain communities are more disproportionately affected by HIV incidence. And we need to figure out a way to fix that. So if we have now 3 medicines actually now 4 that work for HIV prevention. Why do we have these continued cases? And the reason for that is a lot of people don't think that they need HIV prevention. So sometimes people who like to use the word risk will say they have a low perception of their risk. We like to say they have a low perception of their benefit from PrEP. It's hard to take a pill once a day, especially if you don't have a disease and you're taking a pill to prevent a disease. That can be challenging. And with the current injectable that was available before the twice yearly product I'm going to talk about, it was every 2 months, which required quite intensive engagement with the healthcare system, way more than people living with HIV who get to go to the doctor just once a year unless there's something going on. And then there's all the isms, which I'm sure you've studied here with with Jeff Crowley. And so there are sociostructural factors, systemic factors that structure HIV risk. And again, tracking along the fault lines of social inequality. So there are people who are disproportionately affected by HIV in the United States and globally. And our goal is to figure out how to help address them. And our solution that we've been following for the last decade plus is making sure that we focus on innovation in both sides with the product that we're developing, with the way we're doing the trials, and with a focus on health equity. And what do I mean by innovation in health equity? I mean making sure that we're increasing PrEP awareness, countering stigma, and breaking down socio-structural barriers. And there are these 4 pillars of our purpose program, which is the name of the child program for Lenacapavir that I'll be talking about. And the 4 pillars of purpose are partnerships, voice of the people, and community. So making sure the people that we're developing the products for that we are speaking directly to them and getting their advice while we're making it to make sure that it's something that people are going to be willing and interested in taking. A focus on person-centric design in the clinical trial so we can support person-centered care and access afterwards. And of course, a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion to make sure that we are including the people, which I have already explained, are disproportionately affected by HIV incidence. So our trials are representative of the people who are affected, which is really critical because if you don't have the people who need the drug in your trials, then when you go to try to launch it, it's hard to launch in communities that aren't familiar or aren't part of the clinical trial picture. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about drug development and how long it took us to make this molecule. So some scientists, NIH-funded scientists like Wes Sunquist, discovered capsid and its role in HIV. So before I start talking about this, let me explain what capsid is. So HIV is a virus and it affects your white cells. And my 9-year-old twins love telling the story because I have explained it to them in a basic way. So they like to say it attacks the same cells that are supposed to protect you. So your white cells are the cells that protect you from infections. HIV gets in there very wily, shuts down the white cells, and makes people immunocompromised, and then they get sick. That's a very basic explanation, and I apologize if it's too basic for people in the room. But what's really important is HIV is this virus, and it has a little vehicle that it lives in, and that vehicle is called the capsid. And it's a fullerene cone for people with a math background. It's made up of monomers that join up in hexamers and pentamers to make this beautiful geometric structure. And I'll show you a picture of it on the next slide. But what's important is if you want to stop HIV from working, and like getting into our cells and infecting our cells, what you want to do is maybe disrupt its house where it lives, which is capsid. And a way to disrupt it could be to slow down the building of the house, right? Basically, HIV is homeless, it can't get into your cells. So that's the first thing we did. Our first generation lead was to slow down the building of this fullerene cone, of this capsid conical house that HIV lives in. But that didn't work. And then 4 years later, when we figured out we gotta try again, one of our really smart scientists came up with the idea, what if we build a house faster, right? And if you accelerate the assembly of the fluorine cone, it screws it up. It doesn't form correctly because it's trying to do things too fast. I often have that problem when I'm trying to get out of the house. If I'm going too fast, I'll forget something. So that's a critical way that our really brilliant scientists and collaborators figured out how this second generation lead, and that's starting in 2010, where we're all of you in 2010. It took us 6 years to get to a clinical candidate, and then I got to have the honor of working in the first in human study. The way drug development works is we study things in the labs, and then we study things in pre-animal species or models of species. And then when we think it's safe, based on all the preclinical stuff, it goes first in human. So that's the first study. They used to call it first in man, but they've updated their language to first in human. And that's the first time we put this drug into a human. And when we put lenacapavir into the first people, and we would check their blood levels to see how long one was lasting, it just kept lasting. We thought it might last for 10 to 14 days, maybe a month, but it ended up lasting for over half a year. So we did that study, and we learned that lenacapavir is a good drug for reducing viruses. And our next study is phase 1 is first in human, and that's in HIV negative people. Then we studied it in a population of people living with HIV. We gave them lenacapavir, and it lowered their virus in their bodies. So that made us realize that it was working for HIV. And we studied lenacapavir for people who had lots of drug resistance, because there are other options to treat HIV. And we studied it for people with multi-drug resistance. So they would get the injection and some other pills, because you need multiple drugs. Lenacapavir alone is not enough for HIV treatment, but with other drugs, it's been approved for multi-drug resistant HIV. Anyway, when we had all that information, we were ready to start our purpose trials. So we started our purpose trials. Actually, our first endeavor for it was in 2019, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we started the first participants in our studies in 2021. We got our results in 2024. And since then, there's been a lot of lovely recognition globally for the innovation in the molecule and our innovative approaches in health equity. And I'll tell you about that in a second. Okay, so here's a picture of the fluorine cone. This little green sort of conical structure is the capsid. And what Len does is it makes the capsid form too quickly and make defective versions of capsid. So HIV can't enter this is our cell and this is HIV. They can't enter the cell, hijack our DNA replication methodology and make more copies of itself and go off to infect other cells. So Len is very potent. It has high stability and a long half-life. And it's first in class, which means this is the first medication that has attacked the capsid. We have other drugs that work on integrase, like integrase inhibitors, or work on protease. Protease inhibitors work here. Integrase inhibitors work here. NRTIs work in here. But this is first in class. It's the first capsid inhibitor. And it has a flexible dosing profile, so you can give it orally or as an injectable. And it's the basis of our portfolio for new options for HIV treatment and prevention. So right now, the gray bars or boxes or whatever polygon that is, are where we are now. So we have monthly or bi-monthly options for injectables and daily orals for HIV treatment and prevention. We want to get to breakthroughs, which with injectables might be getting to every quarter. With orals might be getting to oral weekly, and we're collaborating with Merck on a weekly regimen that's a pill once a week that contains 2 drugs, a Merck drug and lenacapavir. And then on the PrEP side, we now have twice yearly lenacapavir, and we're working to make it annual. So we have a trial I'll tell you about in a second, Purpose 365, which is the annual formulation. Lastly, on the weekly side, on the oral side for PrEP, we know that some people are sick of taking daily pills for HIV prevention, but they don't like injections. they prefer not to get shots. So we're trying to make monthly or weekly options for oral HIV prevention as well. So let's talk about the purpose program. I like to display the purpose program, which is not the normal way scientists talk about their programs, usually on this beautiful acacia tree, because I like to talk about the foundation and the roots of how we got to our trials. So I told you about Lyme for HIV treatment and multi-drug resistant HIV. Our colleagues went first and developed that. Then we have proof of concept that capsid inhibitors can stop HIV transmission in non-human primates. Putting that all together, that was the foundation for us being able to skip from phase 1 straight to phase 3. And the phase 3 trials were purpose 1 and 2. Normally, for the FDA and other stringent regulatory authorities, you need 2 large trials to get regulatory approval. And so our 2 trials were purpose 1 and purpose 2. Purpose 1 is in cisgender adolescent girls and young women, ages 16 to 25 in South Africa and Uganda. Purpose 2 is in cisgender gay men and other men who have sex with men, transgender women, transgender men, and gender non-binary people. And that took place in the United States, South Africa, Peru, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, and Thailand. We also have purpose 3, 4, and 5. 3 and 4 are collaborations with the HIV Prevention Trials Network. Purpose 3 looks at US women because they weren't included in purpose 1, focusing on US women of color who are disproportionately affected by HIV. And purpose 4 focuses on another population that's very disproportionately affected by HIV, which is people who inject drugs. Purpose 5 is taking place in France and the UK, and focuses on looking at the benefit of long-acting for persistence, which is a very rigorous evaluation of adherence and continuation on a product together, comparing one to oral PrEP. But we couldn't have built this tree, grown this tree, without the partnerships, the voice of the person and the community and the person who might benefit from PrEP, our focus on person-centric design, and our focus on inclusion of the most disproportionately affected people in our trial program. So even though the trial started in 2021, it was set to start in 2020, but there was this other pandemic that got in the way. But in December of 2019, our team went to Kigali, Rwanda, and we met with a group of people, including activists, people who were living with HIV, people who were taking PrEP themselves, people who were scientists and doctors and worked at sites, health officials, civil society, regulators, and ethics folks. And we got them all together and we asked them about the design of our studies because we wanted to do some really innovative things, which including 2 groups who were incredibly disproportionately affected by HIV in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's pregnant and lactating women and teenage girls. So we've never done that before. Usually you don't include adolescents in your adult pivotal trials. And historically, because of some bad outcomes over 70 years ago with like thalidomide and other bad situations that have happened, people who are pregnant have not been included in clinical trials. So there's been this whole movement of people who take care of people who are pregnant, and the activists and the community who asked us to change our focus from protecting people from research, protecting pregnant people from research, and protecting them through research. And another way to think about it is to justify the exclusion rather than justifying the inclusion. Because now, in the old days, we had to justify inclusion. We've tried to flip that because people get really good care when they're in a clinical trial. Anyway, so there was a lot of disagreement in the room, just to be frank. Ethicists, regulators had concerns. Safety people had concerns. And there were a lot of concerns internally in the company as well. But a lot of this discussion stopped when a young woman who was 17 years old stood up from the conference table and revealed that she was quite pregnant. And she said, I'm on oral PrEP, and I want an opportunity to be in trials like this because I want to make sure that I don't get HIV and my baby doesn't get HIV. And there's other girls like me who should be in this trial. And her story was incredibly persuasive because we can have all the preclinical and other data about Len's mechanism of action and how it should not impact fetuses. But nothing is as good as combining that data with a personal anecdote and story. And I often think about this young woman. Okay, so since 2019, we have been on a really consistent journey engaging with key stakeholders. The top is what Gilead did on our own, and the bottom is what we did with Mitchell and his crew at AVA in terms of engaging with the folks on the ground. After we did these broad initial stakeholder meetings and started the trial, before we started seeing participants, we established a global community advisory group with representation from all the types of people that were trying to put in the trial per study. So Purpose One had a group. We even had people get pregnant and have babies on the Purpose One GCAP, which was very helpful for their advice to us. And then we also, and Purpose Two had a broad geographic and gender and identity representation. They told us to do a lot of things, and we did them. And in fact, over the past several months, we've been reporting the results of many of the things that people asked us to do, which we don't have time to talk about today. The Purpose program was the most globally, racially, ethnically, and gender diverse phase 3 prevention program, possibly HIV treatment program conducted to date. You can see the distribution of where the participants were, the percentages by country. But really critically, 67% were non-white. 63% were Hispanic, Latin, and 22% were gender diverse. So remember, we included trans men and gender non-binary people for the first time in Purpose 2. And then here are the results. So in Purpose 1, 100% of people assigned to Lenacapavir didn't get HIV. So that's 100% efficacy for prevention. And in Purpose 2, 99.9% of the people on the Lenacapavir arm did not acquire HIV. So these are truly unprecedented results. Because of our supportive policy for reproductive health, if you did want to get pregnant, we provided contraception. If you did want to get pregnant, we supported you. We had lots of pregnancies, and really excitingly, there was no difference in the rate of miscarriages or birth defects between the people in the study and the background expected rate in the countries they were in. And I'm just going to tell you one quick story about including people who are pregnant. The pictures on the top are from Uganda. So people come across Lake Victoria in these wooden canoes that have like motorboat engines, and they deliver in the labor ward that you can see there. And a lot of times, people are required to bring their own supplies to the hospital to have their baby. So if you arrive in labor and you don't have supplies with you, you won't be delivered because the hospital doesn't have enough supplies. So WHO started a program a couple of years ago called the Mama Kit, and that included all the materials on the bottom left-hand side, materials, gloves, other things to help people have safe deliveries. And we asked to do this in our clinical trial. And because you guys are out of law school, you'll understand the ethical considerations that sometimes take place. So there's a lot of pressure on people who do clinical trials to make sure that there's no undue enticement of participants. What does that mean? Are we bribing people to be in the study by giving them stuff? And internally, our lawyers and regulatory ethics people were concerned that if we gave women mama kits, the pregnant women would be getting special treatment, different from the non-pregnant people. And there's this extra focus on Uganda and bribery considerations and all of this other stuff because of the US government and other things. So long story short, it took us a while, but we finally convinced them. They also really didn't like the idea that when the girls came across Lake Victoria, our visits were really long. clinical trial visits take like 4 or 5 hours. We wanted to put them up in a hotel on the mainland so they could go back in the morning. It's illegal to go across the lake at night, and it's also super unsafe. And when we asked for that, the hotel fees, that was also considered undue enticement. And one of the people internally who hadn't really thought through where we were doing the study asked, why can't they Uber home? So one of the reasons I have these pictures is I have to explain to folks who've only done trials in high income countries, mostly with people not getting pregnant because that was the old rule, what we're trying to do differently and why it's not undue enticement, it's optimizing the safety of pregnant and lactating participants in our study. And there, now the bottom right is from one Ugandan study of women who gave consent. These are purpose mamas and babies. Not a single one got HIV. Moms and babies. So purpose one. So purpose one, many of the ethical advocacy literature is on this, including work done by the Phases Group and various other editorials written to end the evidence gap. You guys may recall that during the COVID pandemic, when the first vaccines came out, people who were pregnant really didn't know if they could take them. It was a hard decision to make because pregnant women were not included in the original COVID vaccine trials. And this was the first to include adolescents, and we had quite a few adolescents in these trials. And this intentional inclusion helped us avoid approximately a decade of delay in access to adolescents and pregnant and lactating people, which is really, really critical because that's so many infections averted and so many families and communities not having to bear the burden. Okay, purpose two. So I talked about this is the first trial to really focus and engineer our recruitment to get a diverse population of cis, gay, bi, and other men who have sex with men, trans women of color, and to intentionally include transgender men and non-binary people following the No Data, No More manifesto by the trans masculine activist. This trial also included adolescents. So now we have data on pretty much all kinds of people in these trials, and we have excellent efficacy and safety results. So the scientific part of the trials where we're figuring out if one works or not, the randomized phase is over. People were unblinded and they were told what drugs they were on. And then they got to pick which drug to continue. And if they wanted to continue on lenacapavir, they are getting Len through the study. So 95% of people in both studies chose to get lenacapavir open label. What does that mean? That means they're just getting Len. It's not they're doing study visits, but they're no longer having to take pills and the injectables because we're done with the randomized blinded phase. And another new thing about the open label extension, we also call it the OLA, is that people can get their injections in multiple different sites instead of the abdomen and thigh, which was originally studied. So the US FDA approval approves giving lenacapavir in the abdomen and thigh because we have the most data on that. Some other regulatory authorities have made different decisions, and I can explain that in case people are interested. We continue to accumulate more data because everyone in Purpose 1 through 5 is getting the option of being in getting their injection in these other sites. And when we have more data, we will submit it to regulatory agencies and hopefully update us. So we talked about the unparalleled efficacy, and I just wanted to highlight that it required both innovation in science and innovation in health equity to achieve these results. And we don't have time to talk about all the different things today, but certainly the product was a great innovation. The trial design was innovative. Many of the things the community asked us to do was innovative, so we know now that Len is safe in pregnancy. The PK or the drug levels are similar in all trimesters and postpartum, which is not always the case with pregnancy and drugs. We also know that Len is safe with gender-affirming hormone therapy and hormonal contraception. But we did this in an ecosystem of partnership and innovating in health equity, engaging very robustly with our investigators, our GCAGs. We set site-specific recruitment plans and inclusion goals, which a lot of people didn't like because we just wanted to slam in their usual people into the trial. And we said no, and we put them on pause if they weren't recruiting people who were disproportionately affected by HIV. And we had nuanced, tailored approaches to participant engagement, including the mama kit and other things we did for teenagers. And in the study, we had qualitative surveys and quantitative surveys for everybody and qualitative in-depth interviews for a subset of people. And those results have been presented and are being presented. And if you're interested in any of the results I've referred to as being presented, you can Google Ask Gilead Medical Conferences, and they will all come up by each conference, every single presentation we've given, asking my team to turn those into papers. But not all abstracts get turned into papers because that's hard. Okay. So Lenacapavir was approved by Ms. Tigo on June 18th, 2025. The first time I saw the zero on the board during the data monitoring committee was June 18th, 2024. So exactly 1 year later. I don't know if the FDA did that on purpose, but anyway. So we avoided this 10-year delay in all these separate populations because usually AOT is only approved in adults 18 and older. We know filing in the United States is not enough. We wanted to file in the 120 countries. We wanted to make Len available in the 120 countries that bear most of the HIV burden of disease. These are the countries where Len is approved. So the United States, the European Union, South Africa, and Zambia, and I'll talk about those countries in a second. In Europe, 1 month after the US approval, we got the European positive opinion, and that allowed us to kick off the WHO pre-qualification procedure. And these are the WHO CRP countries, the collaborative registration process countries. These are the 18 countries that bear 70% of the HIV burden globally, which is why we focused on that. And we chose these countries in collaboration with CDC, PEPFAR, and the State Department, as well as with Gates and other multilateral global funds, because they're the ones who are going to be implementing Len in these countries. And in addition, we've also filed in Canada, UK, Brazil, Australia, and Switzerland. These are the countries in bold now where it's kind of hard to see, but bold black is where we filed, and then South Africa and Zambia are supposed to be blue, which is hard for me to see on the screen. South Africa is 3 for 1. We also have Eswatini and Lesotho because they follow the South Africa approval. And this is incredibly exciting. It's the first time I've been involved in using an EU referral procedure, and it's been incredibly efficient. We found out about the Zambia approval 17 days after we filed. The US approval was 6 months, which is phenomenal. That's high priority review. A lot of times drugs take 10 to 12 months to be approved in the US and years in other countries. And by the end of this year, we're going to do the rest of the CRP countries and some other countries. The team is incredibly busy. I've given a series of talks over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and every time I give a talk, I have to update the slide, and someone has to help me with information because I'm generous and not good at information. So we talked about innovation in science and health equity, and we talked about all of our innovative global registrational filing process. What we didn't talk about is filing is not enough. We also have to ensure access and impact. So this is what we have done to ensure innovation in access. So we had, in the beginning, our approach is going to be voluntary licensing with generic companies and direct provision by Gilead. So we're moving with unprecedented speed to enable access for Len to as many people around the world who would benefit from PrEP, and especially in the highest burden, disproportionately affected areas. So I'll show you on the next slide the timeline, but we completed our voluntary licensing agreements and transferring intellectual property to the generic companies even before we filed with the FDA. And we made bridging supply at risk. So we made supply for 2 million people to get it for 3 years. Why do we do that? That's a lot of drug to make if you don't know if somebody's going to buy it. We made that because we know generics take a while to get up and running, and they need at least 5 or more to really bring down the generic price. So we wanted to make sure that the people in the countries where we have regulatory approval would be getting direct provision of the product made by us and bought by CDC, PEPFAR, and the Gates Foundation. And the Global Fund. We did our simultaneous global filings. We worked very closely with CDC, WHO, and other bodies to support their guidelines and pre-qualification. And we entered all these multilateral agreements that you heard Charles talk about at the beginning as well. Here's our timeline. This is something that is truly, I know I keep saying unprecedented, like how many things can be unprecedented, but this is really phenomenal. I know Mitchell has a slide that shows how long this normally happens, how long this normally takes. But we had the Purpose 1 results in June, and once we got the Purpose 2 results, it worked in the Purpose 2 population of men and gender diverse people, we knew we were going to file. So we signed those voluntary licensing agreements in October, transferred the IP and technology in December. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the blue boxes, the regulatory approvals with the US and EU. And as I said, the EU approval allowed the CHMP process and WHO pre-qualification and the WHO collaborative registrational procedure to move forward. And then we got these agreements signed with Gates and our voluntary licensee with CHI, Unity, FITS-RHI, and other voluntary licensee to support high quality, low cost len to be used in these high burden countries. And lastly, we're finishing our CRP procedure with the rest of those 18 countries that are responsible for 70% of the disease burden. So, what about the other studies? What's happening with Purpose 3, 4, and 5? They are ongoing, and we expect results in the middle of next year, which means we'll be reporting them at the fall conferences or potentially, next winter. And so that's our Purpose program entry for the clinical trials, which are pre-registrational trials or peri-registrational trials. But what about post-approval trials and implementation science? So our new program is Propel. So Purpose to Propel, this is led by Sandy McCoy and Megan Dunbar. And in the United States, we have our Propel studies where we're going to be looking at real-world uptake of Lenacapavir in, like, whoever gets it in the United States. And we're going to also be looking at choice and who's picking len versus who's picking orals or who's picking the 2-month injectable. We also have this US inclusion portfolio where we've funded a bunch of people who proposed ideas to us about implementation science for uptake of long-acting injectables. We're working with ATN 166, which is another choice study for adolescents. That's the Adolescent Trials Network. And then we are doing, those are the phase 4 studies, which means post-approval. Pre-approval in Brazil and South Africa, we were already working on 2 studies with Unity, which include InPrep in Brazil with Beatrice Klingstein, and Project Prep with FITS-RHI and Psychomonic. And then our colleagues at Desmond Tutu Health Foundation are working with Gates on Align, and those are the 3D studies. And we're working on developing other phase 4 studies in countries where we're awaiting decisions on approval and access. And for anyone in the room who is working with folks or organizations that are interested in doing implementation science in the global regions, those countries that are getting len through PEPFAR or Global Fund, we're planning on releasing a request for proposals in December. And that will include, hopefully, a lot of information We're trying to do it on World AIDS Day, but if you don't see it on World AIDS Day, don't stress, it's coming. And that's going to be a request for proposal for implementation science requirement and other options in the countries where that is approved and getting supplied by PEPFAR. But we always have an eye to the future. So moving from the daily oral era to the twice yearly injectable era, we're going to have an era tour. It won't be as cool or color coordinated or organized, but we are working on long-acting orals, as I mentioned, both for treatment and prevention, and our once yearly injectable. So I mentioned a lot of the people, including that really smart scientist who said, let's make this flowing foam assemble more rapidly and navigate it outward. There are also these brilliant people in a field I didn't even know about until I joined the industry. They are formulations people. So you have the molecule, that's the API, but then you have like the vehicle the molecule is in when it gets into your body. And Lenacapavir, the twice yearly formulation, is a sodium salt. And we try to get enough line into people's bodies to last a year through the sub-Q route with this sodium salt formulation. It did not work. We did tons and tons of studies with these amazing volunteers, couldn't get it to work. But our really brilliant people came up with a free acid formulation. I'm not a chemist, so I can't tell you anything more than this is the free acid formulation. With 10% ethanol as an excipient to help solubilize it to get more drug product packed into this formulation. Now, the blue thing on top is the 12-month formulation, and the pink is the twice yearly. You can see the pink dips because it goes lower at 26 weeks, and then it goes up again when you get your new injection. The blue, this is data we showed at COI earlier this year, which is a retroviral conference, an important HIV conference that took place in Denver in March. You can see that it's still lasting. So we're very excited to announce that we're doing Purpose 365, looking at this long-acting formulation, this once yearly formulation for HIV prevention, with our first participant enrolled in July. And I'll be finishing up on our growing Purpose portfolio. So we have the Purpose tree, and this is the Propel and Implementation Science tree. And this is our Purpose 365 tree. And now we have our little forestification trees. And lastly, I will reiterate that I think all of this was possible because we did a really strong focus on understanding what was needed by the people who were most disproportionately affected and focusing on innovations in the science, the trial design, and in health equity to enable those folks to be enrolled in the trials and be part of the scientific solution so we can hopefully end the HIV epidemic for everyone everywhere. The last thing I'll say is there's a giant QR code on that is really good. If you're interested in understanding where we are with access and you have a question about a particular country or a particular region and what's happening there, you can use this QR code and it brings you to the Gilead Access site. And that is regularly updated. And like I said, I have to update my slides. We're updating that website almost weekly with our new filings and our new agreements. And just because I haven't mentioned a region or a country does not mean that we're not working on it. We are, and when we have the agreements, we're going to make them public when we can. So I just want to say thank you for putting up with the challenges at the beginning, the technology challenges, and really thank all the participants who gave their bodies and soul to our clinical trials, our families, friends, and community, our site staff, our GCAMs, our site investigators, and all of the internal teams who worked on Purpose on the study and the regulatory findings and everything else. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That's great. I'd like everyone to give another big round of applause. That work that we've been parts of decision making, pushing to the right. So, but you know, you can invite to go to you for questions, concerns, anything you've seen today. Be delighted to hear. You have some roaming mic. You could stand up if you would, and just let us know your name and where you're from. And, so, Rob,
I was just wondering, I do what program? My name is Shivani Amara. I'm in the JD program at Georgetown. Yeah, no. My question was mostly just learning from the lessons from COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing and distribution process. What could we learn that could inform a faster generic licensing technology transfer from Lenacapavir or any HIV?
Yeah, so we learned from the COVID-19 process because our drug with remdesivir or really, COVID. It also, as an aside, has activity against Ebola and Marburg, and we're working on the most recent outbreaks. We're working with the State Department and remdesivir. Dealing with a lot because remdesivir is also making an injectable like Lenacapavir is a lot more complicated than the process of making single tablet regimen, having drugs in one tablet. That was a huge accomplishment back in the early 2000s. But the generic manufacturers and voluntary licensees that have the tablet skill set don't always have injectable skill set. So we have been working with generic manufacturers for 20 plus years for HIV treatments, for hepatitis treatments, where we cured with our hepatitis drugs, as well as a host of other drugs. So that generic work and work very closely with them. And we did a rigorous process. I think it took like 2 ongoing models trial to figure out which ones to pick, which ones would do the most quickly, the safest, and would guarantee the company. And that's how we picked the 5 initial. We also wanted to have enough treatment stuff or the price, but not too many generic that has to work out or they were processed. So there was conversation about Six. Oh my God, thank you. I'm hallucinating. 5 in South Asia. Anyway, so we learned a lot of lessons from remdesivir and COVID and applied it to Lenacapavir. We've already been asked by other colleagues externally, like what we did with Len and how they can do that. We can give people advice about the control process because it is not straightforward and it's pretty complicated. And I'm a strong believer, not just because I have an academic background, but we need to write up what we did and tell people. So we are working on doing that so we can explain and it's written down how to navigate new control processes because the people who came up with that worked on that. That was also going on for the last 3 years before we saw the data. This huge group of people across functions within Gilead to figure out how to do the access. I hope that.
Wonderful question.
Hi, I'm Joanne. I'm from the Philippines.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so HIV is now an epidemic in the Philippines. And I work with a lot of groups, LGBTQ groups in the Philippines on this. And so my question is out of curiosity. Because for us, a barrier is a cultural stigma to access these medicines. In the purpose programs, how did you hurdle these cultural barriers for communities or individuals to access Lenacapavir?
Yeah, so the purpose program was a clinical trial program, but I can share lessons learned from the clinical trial program that would be applicable to access in real world settings. So the first thing I would say is every place is local, but there are residencies across different geographies. For example, we talk with site staff and community outreach workers in Jackson, Mississippi, in rural parts of Louisiana, in northern Florida, in rural parts of Georgia, and they said that they do not want anyone to see the pills, right? The bottle of pills or like the actual pill because it's so recognizable. The discovery pills is, or that pills are the pills that people know are for HIV treatment or prevention. So they like getting their care far away, so they don't go to the same clinic. And this is counterintuitive because people are always like the last mile on free clinical trial sites or clinical care sites into communities. But people would choose to go out of the way and drive to a metropolitan center. Like people would come from rural Georgia to Atlanta because they didn't want to go to that clinic because somebody would see them affect their privacy. And I think one of the beautiful things about long-acting injectables is get it and set it and forget it. Just like long-acting birth control, you don't have to think about it daily. And that really helps reduce the stigma and internalized self-stigma of taking care of everything that reminds you of your status and requirements. So I think with the attributes of Lenacapavir, long-acting birth control. The other thing I will say from my experience in working at the San Francisco Department of Public Health and in other at the Ward 86 clinic in San Francisco, is it's all about the love. You need to have clinic staff and site staff that look like the people, and they don't exactly look like the people. They have to be warm and engaging and like, you know, the Hopkins site that I visited yesterday that's working on the Keynote study just heard feedback from one of their monitoring visits that the people who inject drugs like coming to this particular site and working with some of the folks at the site because they get treated like a regular person. And they are regular people. It just happen to be using substances. And I think making sure that you hire the right people and have the right people on teams who are working with the right community, absolutely critical. We visited every site when we did the trial. A lot of it we had to do by Zoom, but we went. And when we did Zoom, I made people turn their cameras on so I could see their faces and understand who I was talking to. And we asked tough questions to see how people responded so we could hear how they would work with the communities that we would with. Like for transgender folks, we wanted places that also do gender affirming therapy, that include teenagers and adolescents. We wanted savvy with teens and adolescents. So it comes back down to people under teens and their relationships and how they engage with the communities that are dysfunctional.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Tommy Dell. I'm a JD. My question relates to the sort of ethics nervousness around enrolling pregnant people in studies. You mentioned the very story of the this one.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, as you know, the reach of all these studies has gone fully globally and new drugs, is that a recurring issue that you keep coming up against, and how do you sort of deal with that?
So first thing I'll say is my colleagues and that have their heart in the right place. They have their heart in the right place. And they're following the law and the rules of compliance. Their job is to protect participants and protect potential participants from being bribed, it's not really bribery, but being unduly enticed to do the trials. And anything that monetary value is viewed as something that could affect a person's decision making on being part of the trial. So the fact that the rural people who live on the islands in Lake Victoria are getting a hotel room, that was considered an undue enticement because it had a significant monetary value for those people in the trial. And it really took explaining the context because we did that in DC, where like somebody's going from one part of the city to the other and to stand on top of the other part of the city. That doesn't work. They really get a lot of stuff. But it's coming from the right place. It's just that a lot of our laws and our interpretation of those laws and our regulations and the practice of ethics committees and the internal people who work with those committees are slower to change, right? There's also all these prohibitions about giving people food. Now, I personally come from a culture that, like, I would kick them in my house if somebody came to my house and I did not offer them a beverage and food, and usually 4 different kinds of food. So for me to hear that these people who might be fasting from blood draw, that they are not allowed to have snacks, it's very disturbing to me. I think everyone should be able to have snacks. Big believer in snacks. So we had to really work with the teams on the sites, and some of the sites are really brilliant. They solved it by using donation. NIH funded, non-sponsor funded studies to support food. So like at the site in Rio, they hand people this giant shopping bag of lentils, rice and oil and all this other stuff to make food because when they were seeing a lot of the trans participants, they were sex workers and they didn't have enough money for groceries or time to go to the grocery store because they're sleeping. So there's all these workarounds, but I don't want to like the rules are in place for a good reason. It's just that we need to work around them, and sometimes those rules for files in the United States and that doesn't apply to our laws.
Thank you so much, Melody. I'd love to take more questions, and I'm so sorry. We have an amazing panel that we want to get to. I think there might be some other opportunities to ask some questions at the end, but I think we'll take a brief break and come back with our panel. Thank you so much.
You get to get some feedback, but we're not going to take a long break. Please go back.
So everybody wants to know. There's not.
We're going to get started. Great. So that was a great start, and we have an equally impressive panel. Now, my job is just to introduce our moderator. This is Martha Sichon Cameron, who's a PhD candidate in global infectious disease here at Georgetown University. She was actually diagnosed with HIV in Zambia 22 years ago, and has worked in Zambia as well as in the U.S. She's led organizations across the HIV movement and advanced awareness, prevention, and dignity. Here at Georgetown, she researches women's health. She's completed her MS in global infectious diseases and pursuing her PhD through the Patrick Gilley Graduate Fellowship. She's also part of the team at the Center for Global Health Practice and Impact here at Georgetown, and she continues to serve on the board of the International Community of Women Living with HIV, IPW, North America, as their executive director. Now, I actually met Martha in 2009, 2010, and there's another HIV that we lost during public Dolores outbreak, and I think of Martha in the same way I think of Dolores. So she at the time was working at a really important organization here in Washington, D.C. called the Women's Collection that served women living with HIV, predominantly Black women with HIV. And there's some striving advocates. When you look at Martha, and like when I think of Dolores, I always said she was a church lady. She's helping girls and pictures can make me. And it's disarming because you think, what can this sweet little lady do to me? But let me tell you, they're a real advocate. But the other thing about Martha, that's part of her story, is she also come up on the afterwards, like, you know, we know this stuff is harder than it's let's work with you and figure out how to make it. So she's an amazing person, amazing advocate, and we're just happy to welcome you.
It's such an honor to be here today, and I was really excited when I was invited. One of the things Jeff mentioned is I also have two children that are now 14 and 16 that were both born to have the HIV positive. But when they were born, there was no PrEP. My husband and I did this like little personal blind study of our own. But I have to tell you how stressful it was to go through a pregnancy, not knowing whether you might still pass on the virus to a child or you. And so this is just so amazing. And we have an even more amazing panel that's going to talk about some of the questions that you raised in terms of access and both here and globally. So I am just really excited to introduce Michael Igazaro. He's the Executive Director of Global Black Gay Men Connect. Look up The Legend of the Underground, a documentary that he was a part of about maybe over 5 years ago. It's pretty amazing. But he is leading a movement that is empowering Black and bisexual men globally. And as a global health strategist and human rights advocate, he has over a decade of experience just fighting for rights, health equity in more than 20 countries. He also co-founded the Global Black Pride and helped lead undetectable equal interest. So welcome, Michael. I'll also introduce Dr. Rupa Patel. She is an MD, MPH, a physician at Whitman Walker Institute. She's also a voluntary professor with the Washington University in St. Louis. Rupa has been a leader in PrEP policy and practice across the U.S., Africa, and Asia. She was previously the director of a PrEP program at Washington University and built prevention pathways for LGBTQ plus people who use drugs and sex workers. She advises the World Health Organization on PrEP implementation and conducts medical evaluations for asylum seekers through physicians for human rights. Thank you for being here. And then last but not the least, Mitchell Warren is the Executive Director of AVAC, the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition. I think I'm on like 3 community advisory boards with AVAC. You have led AVAC since 2004, expanding its focus from vaccines to the full range of HIV prevention tools. He co-developed UNAIDS Good Participatory Practice Guidelines and serves on the PEPFAR Scientific Advisory Board, champions equitable access, accountability, and community engagement in global HIV prevention. And I have witnessed that personally. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to hear remarks from each of the panelists, and then we'll engage in some Q&A. So without further ado,
Shortcut. So thanks for the panel. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to talk about some action points and calls to action from a clinician perspective and a health delivery perspective, and its role and how we can, end the epidemic reach. And so for the students, you can take notes and get your pen and paper out. We'll have a quiz afterwards. My colleagues on the panel, they're going to talk about medication access. And I think that's the first most immediate pressing situation. And then after that, you can really dive into healthcare. And so the first point I wanted to make is Lenacapavir has allowed us to now expand the prevention toolbox. And in doing so, it has allowed choice for the PrEP user, but it's now offered the clinician and the health team the ability to offer options, which really finally allows you to meet the person in front of you when they come seek care, where they are at that time, really more of a user-centered approach. And I think now today we can achieve biomedical coverage, biomedical prevention coverage at a community level and an individual level, kind of what the search trial showed in Africa. And so the call to action is, as people come into care, I think now we can frame the message that there's all these options, don't get intimidated. These options are here to help you through your journey in life, which is dynamic and ever changing. And just keep in contact with us. Your health team will help you switch, will help you prevent discontinuation, we'll meet you where you're at. And so the next point is about, health staff and workforce education. PrEP is confusing today to prescribe, to remember different points about all the options for the healthcare staff to discuss this in the community. And so solutions that have been starting to be generated to really invest in the prevention workforce globally on the era of long acting that's brought us new terms are a lot of visual aids on the anatomy, subcutaneous, intramuscular, the injection site, that's part of the thigh, that part of the thigh is part of the buttock. And then the pharmacokinetic terms, PK. Now for the first time we're talking about time to protection, tail, how long is the drug stay in our body? What is that drug? How did that compare? And so I think the call to action is we're all kind of working busily to make aids. I think we need to, in a coordinated way, make aids, education tools and messages around accurate, simple, not intimidating terms so that the non-specialist healthcare provider and the community member who's not in the PrEP world can really engage in this process and we can actually reach those people effectively. And this brings me to my third part is differentiated service delivery or non-traditional care. I mean, this is great. This is the first time we have a tool that is so infrequent enough that we can actually sit in the health center and say, hey, can we take Dr. Patel out of the clinic for a week? And for a month, she goes and delivers care at homes or on a mobile van. And finally getting to a place where we can actually make realistic workflows that are economically easier for the health center. They can staff this and it's sustainable. The program can last from 1 to 3 months or 1 to 3 years, even longer. And I think we need to really work on this. So the call to action is a coordinated local approach with health departments, community-based organizations, health centers to really figure out, okay, who are we not reaching? Who is the mobile van? Who is the staff to be on that mobile van? How do we get more of the workforce to be in different places? And then my last point, the fourth action item, is the policies are behind to foster the differentiated service delivery. When I talk about policies, I mean health center policy and the state and local policy that allow 3 things. Who can deliver PrEP, where they can deliver, and it's not PrEP, it's injection. And what is the supervision that is required for that system? So we've seen Whitman Walker Health start community health worker led injections to meet the demand at that health center. Now there's a physician assistant that goes into homes and delivers treatment. But also we've seen the Washington state governor, sorry, these are more US-based legislations recently. The Washington state governor actually has government sexual health staff now inject syphilis treatment in the field. And just recently in Connecticut, we had retail pharmacies become mobile. And so you can provide primary care with sexual health on pharmacies that run around Connecticut. And so we've got implementation science trials and models globally that have really pushed the needle on differentiated service delivery and policies, such as the Cape Town Mobile Van, the Kenyan Pharmacist Delivery Program. But the call to action is we need technical centers globally to help us create the legislation, this is where the law, and take the legislation that was already written and successful and bring that to other countries in the US, other states and cities. And the healthcare team can't do that. So we have to have the healthcare team work with the law team to really go to government officials. So I think, you know, in summary, if we take these 4 points of the biomedical prevention journey, the workforce development, differentiated service delivery with policies, you're really setting up the healthcare delivery system over decades to optimize today's long actings, which will be PrEP and treatment, and tomorrow's long actings, and reach the people equitably like they need to be reached, and ultimately reducing the number of new infections globally. So thank you so much, and we'll do that quiz at the end of this.
Michael and I negotiated, and we agreed that we're gonna be lazy, unlike most things. That's all right. Well, there are choices, we all get to make choices, so we chose to sit. Thank you so much, and it is really a great pleasure to be here. And in some ways, I have to shut up, there's nothing I can really add to what you've heard. But of course, if you, how many of you been to a program where someone said, well, that person said what I was gonna say, but instead of sitting down, they still said it. A lot of what I'm going to say is relates to something that most people are very, very good. And I did not know most people were covered. I have to go back to my copy of the book to realize that Steve actually had phototype. I have to go back. I had to check it out. Because Paul Farmer influenced anyone working in HIV, whether knowing or not. And one of the things you just heard Rupert describe is beautifully challenge of biomedical product. There is no such thing as a biomedical product on its own that can prevent an infection or end a pandemic. By itself. And we all know that, particularly in this country and around the world for the last 6 years watching COVID-19. Vaccines don't deliver themselves. Lenacapavir has not been delivered itself. Oral PrEP for 20 years, or now 15 years, we've known it's worked and stayed effective. It doesn't deliver itself. And very often, one of the beautiful things I work with remotely is that she's not one of the product developers who thinks that they're in the business of getting a publication or of developing a product. That's the easy. And as hard as the work was from now 25 years ago, when Wes Sundquist began discovering the capsid to where we are today, the remarkable part of all of this is none of it matters, honestly. With all due respect to the scientists, none of it matters if we don't prevent an infection. And that's really easy to say, but it's actually remarkable when I look back on the history. I've been doing this work longer than I ever imagined, probably longer than I should have. But you know, we have a history in HIV and in global health with technologies that don't actually do what they're supposed to do. You can get stuck on either getting the publication or getting it into a policy guideline or even getting it into a clinical practice guideline and not actually delivering it, particularly bad. We do a much better job of antiretroviral. We have a history of having screwed. When AVAC began looking at PrEP, Martha said it was the AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition. And in 2004, the AIDS conference, every AIDS conference has to have a controversy and a protest. And the protest was about oral PrEP, and blood was thrown on the Gilead science food. Even though oral PrEP was not being developed by Gilead, it was their product. But the studies were being funded by the CDC, by the Gates Foundation, by an agency that you may never heard of before January 20th, USAID. They were funding those trials. But activists decided that PrEP was unethical. And I remember with a colleague who wrote the first document of AVAC saying, will they prevent HIV? And you'll notice today's session. It said, can a twice yearly PrEP option curb the epidemic? 20 years ago, we just wanted to know, could it prevent an infection? And people thought that was heretical. And they thought it was unethical research. To your question about the ethics of research, changed dramatically and for the better. So we're in a much better place. But I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes talking about why today and the last 10 months are the cruelest irony. Because we cannot translate the science that Moki described into public health impact as easily as we thought we might. Books came out, and I was very privileged. And Moki said her favorite number was 5. I never had a favorite number until June 18th. Actually, I was on June 7th. I had the really amazing honor of being on the data safety monitor. Then I saw the data before Moki. And I've been on a bunch of data safety monitoring boards for HIV vaccine, which actually cause harm. And that sucks to be on a DSMB where you stop a trial early. And so we saw the data on a pre-scheduled meeting, and the statisticians came in and said, and we actually asked them a multitude. You never see zero in music. So it was pretty staggering. And things really got exciting. June, standing ovation at AIDS conference, second trial came out a couple of months later. And then in December, 11 months ago, under the previous administration, PEPFAR and the Global Fund did something that we at ABAC are the secretary for what's called the Coalition to Accelerate Access to All Active PrEP, working with all the developers and all the donors to try to learn the lessons to your question to go faster. And we thought we finally cracked the code. We have great science. We have PEPFAR and the Global Fund committing to a scale that, although not as ambitious as I wanted it to come in, still more than we ever did with PrEP for the last decade. And then 4 weeks later, January 20th happened. And that's the cruel side of it. We never had a better opportunity for the science of HIV prevention. And it's coming at the absolute worst time, politically and economically. And that's something, and that's why this is so important to have this session in this kind of method. Because this is not about the biomedical, this is about social, behavioral, and structural issues that we all have at stake, whether we are scientists or not. And we have to really think about how we build better and faster. Now, the good news is that was December. January, everything kind of fell apart. The Global Fund happily still said that they were going to commit 2 million people on PrEP, and that's the number that Mobley described. Here's what's really done. A year ago in a meeting, Mobley's colleagues said in a meeting with PEPFAR and Global Fund leadership, we can give you 2 million person years of PrEP per year. And the donors said, oh, we can't take that much far. So right now you have a situation where the activists are yelling at Gilead for rationing supply and only giving 2 million person years over 3 years. But I chaired the meeting. They actually said to the donors, we can give you 2 million per person per year. And the donors said, oh, that's too much. That was even before the insanity of this. Political decisions matter in many ways more than the science in making the science test. And we really have now, we should be able to go even faster. Our projection is that about 1.5 million to 2 million people per year could benefit from Lenacapavir. Donors stepped up and did the right. And they've been more ambitious, but not as ambitious as needed. And so we have advocates have to push them to do more. And I think one of the things that you find, particularly with products developed in industry, is that there's always one bad guy, bad person, and it's always pharma. We take no money from pharma, and that's so we can criticize them, and they don't take our money away, and also we can work with them, and no one can say we're funded pharma. And I'll tell you this: that although I'm sure there are people in every organization that are. I mean, I'm pretty sure. I think I've only 30 people. I think probably maybe 2 me. But the agency itself is not. Pharma is not evil by definition. It makes some really bad decisions. Some of it's driven by political issues. Some of it's driven by a really screwed up American healthcare system. You'll hear that Lenacapavir costs $28,000 per person in the United States. That's made up now, right? And it's made up because of the healthcare system. And it's not Gilead's fault. If Bernie won and we got Medicare for all, we wouldn't have $28,000 price. No one's paying $28,000. And on the other hand, we have now a disagreement that won't be described with generics that says it can be $40 per person in low and middle income countries, or in some, in most of those are. That is huge because that's the same price, more or less, for the 2 injections as it is for a year of oral PrEP. That is transformation. And it means that governments can begin to think in 2027 and 28 are available. That they're already buying PrEP today, and they can't afford cabotegravir, the other infection. And they can't afford Len at the price. Now they can begin to say, oh, maybe I can. Because the key to sustainability in HIV, as we see governments now negotiating beginning this week with the US government about foreign assistance, and being told that you have to start covering more of the costs, which is the right thing. That is what should be happening under any administration. But that's not sustainable if 1.3 million more people get infected every year. So prevention is sustainable. It's not a nice program. I'm supposed to be Scott. That's very nice. I'm thinking about quick action items. The U.S. government needs to spend its money. Congress has appropriated billions of dollars for PEPFAR. The U.S. government needs to actually spend that, and some of it should go to the higher level. The Global Fund, which is the other big partner in all of this, is in its 3-year replenishment. They do it every 3 years. And it's actually being squeezed tightly. Some of the traditional donors are getting less than they had in the past. If they're not fully funded, then no one's going to buy them. The ministries of health to begin to plan for lenacapavir. Anyway, we all talk about lenacapavir way too much. But most people have no idea what PrEP is still. We have to make PrEP famous. We have to create the demand. And the biggest problem we have with policymakers in most countries, including this one, is they're afraid to create demand because they say, well, we can't afford it if the demand comes. And 3 years later, what happens? There is demand for the product, and people say, you see, no one wanted the product. Self-fulfilling prophecy. We have to break the cycle. If we create demand today, yes, there may be, I'd rather have a few people wait in the queue for the product and know that the product's going to come than to not create demand and watch it die on. Those are choices, factor. Okay? Choices we get to make. And so the choice needs to be to create demand for this product and for prevention generally to begin much lower volumes, much lower prices, and most importantly, reduce costs.
Don't know where to begin. Just said everything already. For full disclosure, I used to work at ABAC. You don't know. I spent 9 years at ABAC, so we told my boss. Mind you, I learned everything I know now around prevention and everything, and I came to this country newly, and it was my first couple of months. I actually did my interview on my birthday on August 14th at ABAC. I remember the questions that was happening at that time in 2013 was about, is it prevention or treatment? If you stand for PrEP, are you standing against treatment? So I think I went to an interview, I think that was a question about Mitchell asked me, what do you stand in this? Are you for prevention or are you for treatment? But you can see whatever how I answer that question is a history. Yeah, and yeah, Mitchell. So my name is Michael. I work for an organization called Global Black Gay Men Connect. We're a global nonprofit organization. Work on prevention, treatment, access, advocacy, policy, and someone with HIV as well. I'm refugee and Nigerian. I believe I should say that as well. So I'm Nigerian. It's fun to say. I work in Africa and across the world with key populations in different continents and in different countries. I think this conversation, it was great to see Mokoli describe the science and the background. I think for me, it's like, that's all great, but I have some bad news for you. Sorry to say. With all of that, no one can have access to it. Like right now, there's difficulties in different countries, especially for people I work with, like gay men, trans people, sex workers, migrants, people who have no money. People here in the US cannot afford this medication. That is life-breaking and transformational of HIV. So that's just so crucial. That's reality. Full stop. So there's access issue, there's pathway to access that is not possible for many communities around the world, even Europe and here in the US. So there's difficulties across all different parts of the world. So for me, while the science is great, it's groundbreaking. I mean, we've got the publications, that's amazing. But now is the time to look at ourselves. How do we make sure we make people have access to it? The groundbreaking science will not be groundbreaking if it doesn't work for people who need it. So the groundbreaking on paper and not in reality. So I think we've done the first work. We've proven that science is real, at least I believe so. But now, how do we make the science impactful and actually real in people's lives? And so I think we mentioned 2 million persons here that is available that Keynote is providing through our Global Fund and SEED and others. We did a projection, a modeling with AVAC on our project at the PNC, and we came to an estimate that for key populations globally by 2030, we will need 11.5 million to control the epidemic with key populations only by 2030. So globally, there's a projection for 2 million that's already been available. But for us, just for key populations, we're saying we will need 11.5. So that tells the gap where we're starting from. So the conversations have not even started yet. Because even with the numbers that we have, just to give you historical context, the new infections rate amongst key population is higher in every population across the globe, right? So by 2030, we will see more than 60% of new key populations will need to be on our prevention products, regardless. So we will be covering globally at least 60% of new infections globally. So that tells you where we are. When the product itself that is available is not even enough for everybody yet. Don't talk of populations that will need it the most. And then also the infrastructure. I think Dr. Ruby described, Rupert described the implementation at different settings. So as you all know, since January, when the new administration came on board, a lot of infrastructures or pathways for delivery have been destroyed for key populations globally. So these are little clinics and drive-throughs that communities used to access care. Those clinics do not exist anymore, or most of it do not exist anymore. So thinking about pathways of delivery, those delivery pathways have been destroyed. We will need to repeat all of them. So that's why I keep saying, yes, good news, perfect on paper, but like, how do we deliver this product? Because right now, the pathway to do that has been destroyed. In many countries, in many donors' papers, in many government infrastructures, I think you will hear them saying, well, let's think about a new way to describe key populations. Maybe not mention trans people, sex workers, because it's not more sexy to do that anymore because somebody said so, Americans say so. So you don't need to mention key populations or sex workers or transgender people or people who inject drugs because someone doesn't like that word anymore. And we have to change the way we do that. And we have universities, we have huge companies, and we have huge non-profit organizations, new implementation organizations who are changing what it means to the key populations right now. So very, very important. I'm describing this, I think Michelle and Dr. Rooker and Mokili have described the science and how to get this product. But I think for me, it's like we are a long way to get to access and delivery because a lot of the things that we need to, first of all, resources and pathway for access, those do not exist. Now there's good news, right? Because we are here. There are communities who are working in difficult situations to ensure access. There are CCACs that are part of the purpose trials. There are many people right now, you saw some of their pictures here, I'm going to describe them in different countries, in Zambia, in Malawi, in Philippines, in Vietnam, who are working so hard to ensure access. But I think they are working against almost an impossible situation because first of all, their government cannot afford this product, right? And the government who can afford it are saying, well, we can only give it to you if you don't name these populations in your proposals, right? So how do we make that possible? So there's a long way to go. So we all have to think about like, yes, science, yes, absolutely, we need to fight for science, but there will be no science if the people who need the product are not using it. Unless you're only doing this to get, best product infinity before everybody gets to use. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. I have questions and so many thoughts from what you've shared, but this is the opportunity that we have to kind of open up the floor. And just if the question, so if you have a question, please raise your hand. I can lead us off with one. Okay, I'll go ahead and lead us off with one because I remember when we were preparing for this, I specifically asked Mitchell, I said, I really do want to hear about those pathways of equitable access, especially for key populations. I mean, I am so, I was sharing earlier, even with Catherine from ECPAC, just how excited I am that pregnant women, adolescents and young girls were engaged in this clinical trial. But I am just curious how we are, we've heard about some of the barriers. How are we going to ensure that some of this, that we're not reproducing the inequities that it's all very different model?
It's a great question. It's actually one of the cruelest ironies of the last 10 months. When PEPFAR was suspended along with everything else in foreign assistance, there was then a waiver a couple of weeks later. This is the oddest thing. The waiver for PrEP from the administration said PrEP can only be given. Remember, this is before LEN was approved. but can only be given to people pregnant women and breastfeeding women. Daily oral trap with a differing vaginal rating, integrity, injectable, were initially never approved for that population. And yet the one product that was studied as Berkeley described at the outset, having yet been approved. And actually PEPFAR at the time said no one should have PEPFAR provided PrEP unless they're pregnant and breastfeeding, which basically meant no one could have PrEP. The great news is that and I give great credit to Gilead, but also great credit to the communities that worked with Gilead to change the way science happened. It was really a great collaboration. So the good news is PEPFAR is coming back into the PrEP discussions right now. Pregnant and breastfeeding women are going to get access to it from PEPFAR and from Global Fund. And I will say, and I can be very well, I was going to say the challenge and the groups that Michael described. And I think one of the things we need to make sure is HIV affects people everywhere and everyone, and we have to make sure that our program. Part of that's going to be it may be that PEPFAR doesn't lean in and do what they do with population support, but that means advocates need to push their country, governments, and the Global Fund to do things that they haven't done because PEPFAR was doing instead. So I think a lot of this is about rethinking partnerships and collaborations in place. And I do think the community's learning and doing it better, but we have a long way to go. But a lot of this is going to be making sure that it's a bit like a big puzzle. And if PEPFAR's puzzle piece is no longer there, someone else has to fill in that one and wait for a lot of pressure.
To say, yes. So we did recently we worked with over 16 countries, key populations to create like national action plans. So not only PEPFAR does this country operational plans, where they come together to create these core plans, and that did not happen. I think they have a different process ongoing right now. But we did create a plan where we need to work with governments to develop what it would look like realistically. What we look at to implement HIV prevention and treatment programs for communities in their countries. The reason why I said that was we invited other donors on board, like the Dutch government, German, Gates Post, and others, to look at those plans. And I think one new thing that's coming out of the plan right now is the Dutch government just announced a new funding stream for the HIV instruments. And in that funding stream, they specifically make sure that to look at delivery processes that doesn't include actual products, like the testing, the community settings, infrastructures that they are funding with the goal that PEPFAR covers, the global covers for the product itself, that they are expecting to fund other things. So I think for us, there are good things that come up from different processes. So again, it's about sharing responsibilities with what you can fund, maybe that government can fund something else as well.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity to ask a question. My name is Julia Zigman. I work at the National Association of County and City Health Officials at the Metro in DC. Rupa, you spoke about policies and small policies that support adoption of or implementation of PrEP in an HIV workforce. I'm wondering if any of you on the panel could give some more examples of the type of policy changes you'd like to see to prepare a workforce to implement PrEP in a way that equitable in the population.
Started and pass over to Mitchell. I mean, I think again, it's making a menu of options, like we have a menu of options, the actual medications. I think the option and the policies we need to expand our delivery options are in the United States. Can you inject in a home? Like some of the states and cities have different ideas of that. When I called Connecticut, pharmacists in Connecticut cannot inject. I don't understand that because in Houston, the entire Houston Run program at Legacy Health Center is injected by pharmacists. So I think we have these patchy set of laws that allow us to do different things.
we were able to change the law. So very good. Also, I want to say goodbye. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dr.
So Julia, this is just one example of, it's where can these injections be delivered and then by whom? Usually you need to be licensed, so you need to have a certain degree that qualifies you to inject. And anything, those are the things that I talked about with Washington State and how the governor was very progressive in saying we can't be short. So that's still the workers to give these injections to and not have delays in treatment. And when you have delays in treatment in a lot of these communicable diseases and transmission.
But maybe just to add information, when we did DC, one of the things we realized is that there's no uptake among women, obviously, but the gynecologists or OBGYNs didn't prescribe or even talk to women about that. So when you're talking about, really becoming creative and also changing laws and guidelines, I think it's really critical to be able to have a lot of options for the different.
And represented amazing, which didn't talk about some of the guidelines that come from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Well, obviously, you need an HIV test to be able to access advanced retroviral treatment or antiretroviral-based prevention options. Making testing easy and making it the simplest, fastest test, so if someone tests and go direct to injection, direct to oral prep, if that's what they want, is really important. And that's why the Centers for Disease Control is actually a really important relationship, which I have to say, 2025 in Washington, D.C. Yeah. And the other piece is not only proving it to go there. Mobile clinics, you see a number of South Africa is a remarkable program. A lot of countries would not allow this product in a mobile clinic. So it's who can do it, where can they do it, and what's the testing pathway. And we should make it controlled at the top. And ideally, there's some colleagues at Harvard who have good prep eventually, this oral prep. But I think you could have in the other years, injectables, how can we make it as simple as possible over the counter, much like we think about contraception, which wasn't over the counter decades ago. Now it's emergency contraception. How can we make it as simple as that? That's going to take time, it's going to take evidence, but that's a pathway.
I want to see if there's any more questions, but go ahead and talk. And what? Okay. Any two questions back then? We can take them both. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Debbie Gogo, and I actually work here at Georgetown at the Center for Public Health Practice and Impact. My question is, we are in the second phase of ending the HIV epidemic, activities and initiatives, across many local and state health departments. And, we are introducing these innovative prevention strategies, but as we've all seen, starting at the beginning of the year, we're actually losing funding to actually fund these innovative strategies. So if you get any ideas on how we can curb these challenges as we are giving, technical assistance to, state and local health departments on ending the HIV epidemic, but we're also, at least at the federal government level, this funding is being cut for prevention.
Hi everyone, so my name is Regis and I'm a student in the The first thing I wanted to say is really something that I think we should flag when I think that we should when it comes to information. Few people even know what because it comes from somewhere. And I can tell you that the amount of people that don't know that doesn't know to get to sort of mention. And I think of it as such an important thing, or part of the toolkit to get access, because how can you access it in right? And the second issue is really when I think about power and politics, politics, I want to flag those like what do think, or what are something we can continue to cultivate these relationships that we have with the members of the political parties or people who are in decision-making positions to get them to continue to care about these issues. Because when it comes to political issues and political environments, they constantly change. There's one administration, for example, that cares about these issues, and another one doesn't care about it. How do you cultivate that ability to continuously engage members in different political environments to continue to care about this issue and this program to achieve people?
Thank you so much. Both great questions. So, funding for HIV, every academic.
I can start with the first one. So I think you brought up a great point. The loss of federal dollars, which then trickles into local dollars to help sustain these programs. And so I think the first thing to do is to coordinate all these stakeholders and to see what's been lost and who has what. And a lot of times you'll see some missed opportunities that there's enough staffing at this health center clinic that this nonprofit has a mobile van and can they go ahead and work together. I think we have to do a better job to, in general, before all of federal funding, to have more coordination and discussions locally. But I think this was unfortunately forcing us to have those hard discussions and to like creatively stitch together programs.
I can just go really quickly about, I was going to mention about, funding and funding costs. I think it's obviously we all have to live with that right now globally and here in the US as well. I think for US context, I think there is, in my view, there is a lack of coordinated, resources for coordinated advocacy on that issue. I think a lot of organizations in the US were very service delivery focused and centered, where it feels like everybody's paying for what they are doing specifically and their targets, and there's no coordinated accuracy. Okay, this is how much we lost, and this is how we want to coordinate to respond to it collectively. So for me, my call to action is we need more coordination and advocacy in the US about the response, how much we've lost, what is realistic for us to fund moving forward, and what we can just cut off. Because again, the truth is we can't keep having the same money. That's true. It's hard, even if we have a new president tomorrow with Democrat. I'm sorry, but we can't go back. What is sensible, what is realistic, what is practical, and what can we move forward. We should have, that would be my viewpoint on access and education. I think it's really crucial. So at GRC and Prep Our Project, we have a TV series coming out that is led by African people populations around the world around Prep. I think for us, really crucial to see people that look like us and taking prep and understanding it from a trauma series specific perspective. So I think we need a lot more work to do on demand creation and literacy. And sometimes anybody in the US, a lot of Black people don't know about prep, but or prep. Don't talk about long acting prep. So we need a lot of information and literacy to get there.
I know we talk about creating demand, and I think we really need to talk more about that. I don't know if I know we're out of time. I wanted to give everybody just one quick call to action, last call to action. I don't know, just 30 seconds each.
Hit my 4 calls to action.
Yeah.
Just to answer all those last great questions. HIV is not over. We have to remind people of that. Make PrEP famous and make PrEP simple.
On the movement, on the advocacy, really, on the advocacy, how we might possible.
We just hopefully you all realize that we're getting more positive note. So we had a stellar semester, but we had 4 modules. The first one was on the model, the Make the American Health. Then we went to HR1, the so-called, or the bill that shall not be named, I guess we can call it, but we dealt with staff and child under Medicaid cuts. Then we went to Supreme Court cases, and we dealt with Medina, Planned Parenthood, and Scrimeti, the transgender care for minors. Then we've done a module on U.S. leadership in global health. The last week was on U.S. withdrawal from the World Health Organization and the pandemic agreement. So every week it's not been the most exciting. So at least we had a topic to end with where there's some hope, even though we all have a lot of work to do. So thank you all for coming, and again, it's been a great discussion, so much appreciated.